Welcome back to part 2. This time it's all about the age-old question, the scary question, the question that everybody gets wrong according to the opinion of everyone who has a different opinion. And we're going to settle that question once and for all. The question is, which distro should I pick? There's like a million of them. So, one way would be to just take this list, make it into a big circle, add a little marker here to see where it lands, and then spin the wheel and see where it lands. But there is also a much smarter way to do this. In order to understand which distribution is correct for which type of person, we need to actually open up the hood and see what a distribution looks like. This is how I see a Linux distro. Each block represents a program or a group of programs. The surface at the very bottom is the hardware and firmware that we are using the system on. I'm probably going to get a bunch of this semi-wrong-ish or layman-ish, I would like to coin that phrase, but I'm hoping that this is from a user to a user so that we can all hopefully understand it well enough to use it. The first layer of bricks is the foundation of the system. The Linux kernel, for example, handles all the things a modern operating system should come with. It manages the CPU, memory, it manages reading and writing to hard drives, and an absolute ton of other stuff. You can read everything about that on other sites. It is also what makes a Linux or a Windows or a Mac because it's usually always the same core. Next to that, we have the bootloader, which is responsible for managing the initial launch of the system in the first place. And you can, if you have different operating systems or versions thereof, even choose which system you load into. Also, there's drivers for various hardware. With Linux, as far as I understand, most of these are just directly put into the kernel, but there are some separate drivers that you need to install, like the proprietary AMD and NVIDIA GPU drivers. The second layer is what I'd call service programs. This could be the package manager that handles the installation or removal of software, system updates, and all that sort of stuff. Next, there would be the compositor, which manages all the window resizing, minimizing, maximizing, scaling, and so on. There's also a service which I use right now, which manages all the audio and video playing and recording. I would kind of say this is like plumbing for a house, plumbing and electric wires and all that sort of stuff. It may be stuff that we don't really see, but trust me, if it weren't there, we would all be noticing it within seconds. Definitely. It's the same with some jobs, like the maintainers of this code might not have the flashiest things to show all the time in their screenshots or anything, but trust me, if we like this to a real world situation, imagine a world where all the people collecting the trash and driving the dumpster trucks would not show up for work for a month, or all the movie stars not showing up for a month. I know which world I would rather not live in, because I can do without movies for a month, but not with cities full of trash. So a quick shout out to all the people doing a lot of thankless and boring quote unquote work. Thanks a lot, everybody. The third layer is the desktop environment. Whereas I'd argue that everything below just works, and as long as it just works, we are fine with it and don't really care. This is what we see, and so we start caring. The desktop environment is how we use the computer. Taskbars, global hotkeys, notifications, the overall design, look, feel, customization of the user experience, all that sort of stuff just depends on the abilities you have with specific desktops that we can install. And picking a desktop that looks and feels like something you want to use instead of having to use something because there may not be any alternative, such is the case with Mac and Windows, is definitely one of the strongest points of Linux as far as day-to-day use goes, in my opinion. The final layers built on top of that are all applications. This can be web browsers for surfing the internet or recording software that I am using right now. The video editor I will be using probably in a few seconds again, the text editors that I'm currently reading this text from, the entire Office suite, media players, you name it. The little bits on top of these programs could be, for example, browser extensions or small plugins for specific programs. This is what I imagine that a distro looks like. Some of these on top are default installed, some of these are just stuff that you, the user, installed yourself because maybe you didn't like the default browser and wanted to have a different one. So yeah, that's what in my head, and I hope this is as correct as reasonable, a Linux distro looks like. Very simplified, of course. The reason why it looks like it's a patchwork is because for every job there is to do on Linux, there's most likely at least 2 or 3 programs or projects that can get the same job done. Of course, some are better or worse, but there's also ones created for specific purposes. Like, take a look at the kernel. There is the standard Linux kernel, but if you want to install a Linux on a Mac, you should instead look into Asahi Linux, as it supports at least some of Mac's or Apple's hardware. On the Steam Deck, which runs SteamOS, a Linux distro, a lot of unnecessary drivers are removed because, well, SteamOS is currently, at least at the time of speaking, is only intended to run on the Steam Deck, and that doesn't usually come with additional weird hardware. There are also kernels left small for security reasons because the more code there is, the more potential vulnerabilities exist. And it's the same for just about everything. Nearly every block has a different version, a different color. Especially a complex desktop such as KDE Plasma can be demanding for old hardware, but there is more lightweight desktops which can use a lot less resources, though they might not look that great or have that big of a functionality built in. And that's not even mentioning all the software stacked on top that is basically just whatever you want. From what I understand, this is what a distro is. It combines a set of these programs with reasonable and functional default settings and configuration files. All of the required code libraries they rely upon, as well as an installer, and potentially some alternatives baked in directly to choose from. This could be as small as have different languages, or as big as have an entirely different desktop that you can install. In addition to that, the makers or maintainers or whatever you call it of a distro provide a repository, a server for providing software which can offer more alternatives or applications, and of course also contain updated software packets. The system can then compare the currently installed old packets to the new online versions, download them, replace the old ones, and that's how you do updates, basically the gist of it. It's important to understand, though, that by no means are you limited to what is offered in your distro's software repository. It is a good starting point, but the fact that it's basically just different flavors of Linux makes most software interchangeable as long as the requirements are met. And if you don't understand which requirements are needed beyond just the base functionality of a modern operating system, it's probably not software you should really mess with unless you know what you're doing. So basically, any distro can be used for anything, and most applications are compatible with most distros. So when we boot up into our desktop environment, we see just that. The desktop surrounding all the applications and extensions that we use in our daily life. I'd say there's only 2 valid reasons for normal users to look at the plumbing below, same as with real-world plumbing. When it's time to build that home that you are hoping to live in for the foreseeable future and make the foundations so that they fit you as good as possible, and when something stops working and it needs fixing. To sum it up, what we want is to kind of neglect the applications on top and focus on everything but that. Desktop environments are usually the first thing that you see when you check out a distro. Sometimes there's different versions of distributions with different desktop environments. For example, Ubuntu has GNOME, but Kubuntu is basically just Ubuntu but with KDE Plasma from what I understand. OpenSUSE comes pre-installed with GNOME and KDE Plasma, and on top of that, for weaker machines, it has IceWM. Editor's note: it seems they recently switched to XFCE for more recent versions. Arch with Arch install lets you just choose even more options. Drivers are a bit of a different issue. I have not yet found any websites that allows me to simply put in a device name and see which distro supports it and which distro doesn't. But You can just try a different distro out if what you have doesn't work for you. Most Linux distros can be ran off just an USB drive, so you don't really need to install anything to test out if you have the drivers for your system. And here's a few more keywords that are likely to come across your way if you're looking for distros. Immutable systems, from what I read, they take away your ability to easily modify certain core aspects of the system in order to have higher stability and better security. Stable and scheduled release branches, or channels as they might get called, they often have a set period of time where they run, and they receive mostly just security updates. There will be another version after that, and this new version brings actual improvements into the system, but you usually need to either reinstall or make a distribution upgrade to benefit from this. And of course, after the lifetime of that specific version has run out, there won't be security updates, so you will need to update to the newer version. It's not as much hassle, I assume, at least with OpenSUSE, as this might sound like. This comes with the downside of often having outdated software packets. So if you rely on the most recent drivers, or you just want to be more on the cutting edge, you might want to try a rolling release distro. They are the opposite of these stable distros. They focus on releasing updates to individual packets as often as reasonable stability is achieved, so that your computer will be running with the latest and greatest people have been programming. But if something slips by, expect to roll back to the previous snapshot. We will come to that. And just live with that until whatever updates had a bug or didn't work for you now are made to work. Looking for the best distribution, in short, is nothing but balancing the pros and cons of each distribution and then finding something that aligns the most closely with what you actually want. The truth is, there is no best distro. There can only ever be the best distribution for you specifically. So if down the road you find something that is secure, has all the drivers you need, and does everything you want, congratulations, you have found the perfect distro. And everybody who is trying to tell you that X, Y, and Z is so much better, they are wrong. If something down the line changes, you are also not married to your distribution, so you can just switch to whatever then is best for you, for your new use case. So if this is true, then why is this video series all about OpenSUSE and not just a general guide to Linux? The answer is very simple. For me, that perfect distro is OpenSUSE Tumbleweed. And I'm sure that some other people will be like, oh no, that is horrible. How could you? To which I reply, then make your own video series about your favorite distribution so people can take a look at these videos and see which building blocks are in that distro and what might be better here or there. And then we will have a bunch of guides for specific distributions that give a little more of an in-depth look at what is actually in there. So where OpenSUSE is concerned, there is two major variants which we care about. The aforementioned Tumbleweed, which is the rolling release branch, and then Leap, which is the stable branch with fixed release cycles. Well, I'm not sure how fixed the cycles are. I think they have various lengths, but you get the idea. It's just released, and then sometimes you may need to do an update to that. There's also MicroOS, which is immutable, but from what I understand, that is more for servers or virtual machines. So next time we will take a look at what OpenSUSE brings right out of the box, and then you can see how closely that aligns with your specific wishes and if that's a match for you or you need to look somewhere else. Thanks for watching and listening, and until next time.